Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books that I can recommend the best to you. And it is the September wrap-up episode. I actually cannot believe we're in October and I'm recapping September this year. I always feel so old when every month I say this year is fine, but I cannot believe it. September was a good month, an interesting month, very much like a transitional month, which I feel like because it's like back to school season, like it always feels kind of very transitional seasons, although it is like very warm in New York still. I had a big month. So I'm just gonna like you guys get the tea first. I haven't announced this, but something happened in September. I got a job. So if you didn't know or you forgot, I got laid off on July 1st. And I got a job this month. So that was very exciting and happened like midway through the month. It doesn't really feel really good though, because I'm not starting until the end of October when I get back from my Paris trip. But like I said this when I was laid off in July. I was like, I feel like I just wanted to keep things closer to my chest this time. And I probably will announce where I'm working like when I'm a few weeks in because it's kind of relevant. There is your hint. But I didn't like do a post and everything when I got a job because I don't know. I just felt like I just wanted to like keep things more private. But you guys are like the inner circle. So you get to know that I got a job, which was very exciting. And I spent really like starting end of August, but like really in September, I was interviewing nonstop. I was like final rounds with 3 places. And the place that I'm going is just like everything very serendipitously worked out. I just feel like I'm now setting down this path I literally never saw for myself. I'm so excited about it. It just feels right. And I feel like I got laid off in July because I was meant to be ready and open to a new opportunity when this one arose. So very exciting. And that was just like a huge fucking relief because if you've ever been unemployed, you know, and I was starting to like really, really, really lose my mind stressing about money. And this happened like when I was like a few days into a mental breakdown, and I didn't even realize how like down bad I was because it was just kind of became my normal. But then when I like got the job, like my whole demeanor just changed. And my mom was like, "It's so nice to see you smiling again." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even realize I wasn't smiling." But yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can guess. What my new career path is. DM me. I'm curious if you can guess, but I'm not going to. You guys are going to have to wait like a little bit before I'm really ready to talk about it fully publicly. But I had a really good month. Like even before that happened, I started the month off. I was in Charleston for a wedding for family friends, and it was like people that I grew up with, but I haven't seen since I was like a teenager. So it was like really fun and really special to like reconnect with like it was basically like one of my best friends growing up. Her sister got married. So but they had moved to Florida when we were young. So I would still see like my friend and her immediate family, but like all the aunts and uncles and stuff, like I knew them. So they were like my own aunts and uncles growing up. So it was like really fun. I love Charleston. We like the way the wedding weekend worked, it was over Labor Day weekend, but it was nice because we had a lot of free time. So we went on a sail, we did some shopping. It was just like a lovely trip. Me and my mom went together. Randomly though, I just remembered this the other day. I was telling my aunt about it. When we were flying to Charleston, I have never seen this before, but like I'm a window seat girl and it was nighttime, but I had the window open still, obviously. And thank God, because they mentioned that like our flight was going to be a little bit longer because we had to go around a storm and you could see the lightning. And it was like so spectacular to the point where the pilot came on and was like, there's a lightning show happening on your left. And it was like, lasted for a very long time, but I've never seen anything like that. I felt like I was in Hercules. It was so cool, so beautiful, just like a very like surreal moment, being a human in the sky. And then I got home from Charleston and I was like back and forth. I was back and forth a lot in September and I'm really exhausted right now. I'm feeling okay now that I'm speaking, but this is like real talk. Sometimes with my anxiety, it manifests in a way where like it's like really bad brain fog where I feel like I used to say I'm like trapped on like the lower level of my brain and the real world is at the top level and I like can't get up to the top level. And since I started taking Lexapro, it hasn't happened as much lately, but I've just been really exhausted, and I was like feeling it yesterday and I was able to snap out of it, and I'm like feeling it today. So speaking does help me snap out of it, but my brain's like a little, it's foggy. It's like a little bit slower than usual right now. So bear with me when I start trying to recall all the books that I read this month. But um I feel like I got like I'm like I just feel so exhausted because like I was back and forth so frequently. Even though I was like still mostly living at home for most of the month, but then even since I've been back, I haven't had a full weekend in the city, and I'm not having a full weekend in the city until November. So it's just like I'm just tired. But I was home, still going to the beach in the city for fun book events, which I met Oprah in September, which is insane. I went to a really cool event last week at the Instagram offices. And then in the beginning of the month, though, which is what I keep trying to say and distracting myself, one of my best friends got married. So that was in the city, and that was like really beautiful wedding, and it's just like so wild and surreal seeing your close friends get married. It was like such a beautiful night. And then I got my last beach days in, and I spent a lot of time with my family, going to all my younger cousins' sports. My brother is the JV football coach at our high school, and he coaches with my uncle. And so I went to one of their games to watch. Then I actually went, I didn't post about this, but I went to West Virginia for a weekend. My cousin, who I've spoken about a bunch on here, Kristen, she's a freshman, and I went with my aunt to visit her for parents' weekend. So I was like, really what got me so exhausted, because I was a giant road trip. But I love a road trip. It was like so fun to see her. So weird to be on a college campus. And yeah, now, I mean, now it's October, but I've just been like kind of very busy still, because I've known for a few weeks that I'm starting a job after my trip. So I'm like trying to enjoy these last few weeks of freedom, but also I'm very busy and like gearing things up for my trip. But yeah, September was a good month. I feel like it was like a bit of a reading slump month for me, which I know some of you are like, that's insane, because I'm about to talk about 20 books. But I felt like first of all, for the fact that I've spent like many days this month, especially on the beach, like that is like a low number for me. But I just like wasn't always in the mood to pick up a book, and kind of like making myself do it, because I know that it's healthier for me than like doom scrolling on my phone. But I just felt pretty slumpy. I didn't love a lot of the books that I read this month, and I think part of that is because I was finishing up that summer reading challenge that I set for myself, where I pulled 30 books off of my shelves and made myself read them over the summer. And every time I do something like that, like with the 24 and 24 challenge, and we're going to pretty soon be picking 25 books to read in 2025, I don't love all of them. And I have to get better. I like, my resolution for this year was to DNF more, and I just like didn't stick with it, because I have to get better at like either not even picking that books up that I think I'm not gonna like, or I don't know. But whenever, I don't know, it just like put me kind of in a reading slump, because I wasn't loving all the books from the challenge, which we're going to talk about them. But it did inspire me. I did a huge clear out of unread books in my apartment, because I was like, I don't want to. The next time I'm doing this challenge, I want them to be like, the books that are still on my shelves were vetted. I thought about it, and I thought that I'm going to keep it. And I'm probably going to do another clear out even before I pick my 25 books to read in 2025 challenge, to make sure that like I only want to have unread books in my apartment that I'm excited to read. So that's just like a little admin work I've been doing in my apartment. But I guess we should get into it and start talking about my September reads. So the first book that I read was Daydream by Hannah Grace. This is the third book in the Maple Hill series. Icebreaker was the first, which was my favorite, and then Wildfire, and then this one. I was excited for this one because I loved Henry in the other books. It's like, it's a romance universe. I would still read them in order, because I'm like a purist like that, but you could just pick this one up. And my thing with these books, though, is that they're very long. They're like over 400 pages. And I was really into the couple with this book. I only gave this 3 stars, which is also what I gave Wildfire. I gave Icebreaker 4 stars. I was reading this while I was in Charleston, like traveling to and from and physically in Charleston. So reading on a trip like is always different. And because that you're just like, your time is like limited, you're spending it in a different way. But I start to get a little bit bored. Like, the main thing with this girl is that she's the oldest daughter, and she's a huge people pleaser, and like I'm the oldest daughter, so and the oldest child in my family, so I understood a lot of that. But like her and I just like approached those things differently, and it was just got like a little too like in her issues for me. Like I was just like, all right, let's like it could have been like 100 pages shorter, I think. So still really cute. I'll probably continue to read that series, but I liked it more than Wildfire, um, but not more than Icebreaker. The next book that I read was The Housemaid is Watching by Frida McFadden. I gave this 2 stars. So I've only read the Housemaid books by Frida. If you're not familiar with her books are just like ridiculous and dumb thrillers, but they are so addicting. Like you literally cannot stop reading them. So I read the first 2 Housemaid books. Those are but like I've only ever read 3 books from her, and they're the 3 Housemaid ones. And the first 2 was just like could not stop reading them. What is going on here? This one I have no idea what happened, and I literally can't say anything because it's a third in a series and it's a thriller. So it was just like off the rails. It felt so different. It was so weird. Like I didn't like it, but there's such quick reads that I was like, okay, let me just like keep reading it. Like I don't know what she puts like crack in these books. Like you literally cannot stop. So I do have The Boyfriend by her. I own that. So I'm going to read that one next. Let me know what Frida's you guys think I should be reading. I'm like debating I stopped doing Kindle Unlimited when I lost my job because it was just like $11 a month that I wasn't using it enough to justify it, but I think I'm going to do like a KU month and just like load up on a bunch of her books. So TBD for that. The next book I read was The Art of Catching Feelings by Alicia Thompson. I gave this 3 stars, and I actually like seriously contemplated DNFing this, but it was like such a quick read. I was like, let me keep going, which that's my problem with like not DNFing more, because I'm like, oh, I can finish this though in a few hours. Like I might as well just keep going. This is a baseball romance, which like for me to pick that up was kind of crazy. The cover won me over. It is very cute. Basically, this girl heckles this baseball player and it goes viral, and then she DMs him, but she forgot to like apologize. So it's kind of like You've Got Mail but make it baseball, and they fall in love in the DMs, but then she actually ends up getting a job with the team, so they meet in real life, and like she knows that they're DMing every day and are like falling in love, but he doesn't. And that's basically what happens. If you like baseball, you'll like it more than I did. The next book I read was The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton. I loved this. I gave this 4 stars. So it's kind of hard to explain. So Kate Morton writes these like really rich and like sweeping and like beautiful historical fiction novels. I know a lot she doesn't work for a lot of people. They can be like a little slow. I'm actually a really big fan of her like older titles. Her last well, I liked The Clockmaker's Daughter, but her last one, Homecoming, I didn't really love. But in this book, it is so hard to try to explain this. So basically there's like 2 timelines kind of, and in one of them this girl, I'm just gonna pull up the exact description for the book, and like that'll help me try, because in my head I'm just like picturing every single thing that happened. So how do they okay, right, okay, so there's 2 timelines, and in the past timeline, which happens in like early 1900s, I guess, the main girl is Nell, and she grew up in Australia, like thinking that actually there's like 3 timelines or not. Why can I not figure out how to properly tell the story? Okay, I guess I'll start with the present. So our main girl in the present time is Cassandra, and she was very close with her grandmother, Nell. And when she dies, she discovers this old suitcase in the garage, and inside of it are like beautiful old children's clothes and also this book of fairy tales. So she goes on this trek then to learn about who her grandmother really was and her past life, because she also at the same time inherits this house in England, but they live in Australia. So basically what happened, Nell was like a missing child that like washed up not washed up, but she like showed up in Australia on a boat, and she was adopted by this family. So we are then following Nell's like ancestry, but then we learn about the author of those fairy tales. And so then there's a lot of like kind of like Downton vibes, but it's really like family mystery. In Cassandra's timeline, she's unraveling everything, and then in the past you're watching it all play out. Like I love when historical fiction novels are like that. but it is so, so beautiful. You feel like you are on this old English estate, and the fact that the main woman in the past timeline, like she's an author, and you're of fairy tales, and like there's this beautiful element of magic and like the fairy tale of it all, and it's just like the way the mystery and everything unravels is so, so good. Like I loved this so much. I think my favorite Kate Morton is The House at Riverington, which is like straight up Downton Abbey vibes. This one comes as a very close second favorite. So 4 stars, loved that. Next, I read Dating You, Hating You by Christina Lauren. I gave this 4 stars, and I did cover this on a previous episode of the show, so I won't go through everything, but it's an enemies to lovers Hollywood romance, but it was written before like the Hollywood romance thing became huge. So it's very unique. They're agents, really loved it. Fun banter. The next book I read, I also covered on that same episode. It's Elizabeth of East Hampton. I gave this 4 stars. It's a modern day Pride and Prejudice retelling about like city person Mr. Darcy versus Hampton's local, our Lizzie Bennett. I really loved that. And actually, after I read that, a bunch of people were like, you need to read her Emma retelling, Emma of 83rd Street. And I immediately, like, it's been like 4 weeks. I put a hold on the Libby app for it, and I just got it. It just hit my Kindle. So I think I'm going to read it. When I go to Paris, I'm bringing 7 or 8 books with me, and then I'll have my Kindle. So that'll be like one of my Kindle reads in Paris. The next book I read was The House of Lincoln by Nancy Horan. I gave this 3 stars. So it was kind of like I had the assumption it was really like historical fiction about the Lincolns, which it is, but it also wasn't. Like, I don't know, it's hard to make sense, but basically it's a Civil War historical fiction told by Anna, who is a Portuguese immigrant in Illinois, and she like works for the Lincoln family when he's like, what was he, a senator in Illinois. So she knows Lincoln very well. She knows specifically like Mary, his wife, very well. And then you kind of like follow most of her life. So then like she grows up in the house, Lincoln becomes president, Civil War. So like you're seeing stuff like with the Lincolns through Anna's life. Then at the same time, there's another perspective of this man who is helping runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad. And then every now and then you'll have the perspective of Mary Todd Lincoln, Lincoln's wife. And it basically follows like you learn it follows Lincoln's political rise all the way through to his assassination, but it's like very heavily focused on Anna's life. I wish it was a bit more focused on the Lincolns. It just like didn't super work for me. Like I think that the premise was great, but the execution, like, it just lost me a little bit there. So I gave that 3 stars. Next, I read The Last Widow by Karen Slaughter. I also gave this 3 stars. So this is a Will Trent book, which like you can just pick them up. Like I've just picked up a few Will Trent books a few times, but I think I'm kind of like I'm done with Will Trent. I have not read all of Karen Slaughter's books, but this is like I've maybe read 5 or 6 now. And this is my least favorite that I read. So I have 2 Karen Slaughter books in September. This one was a part of that summer reading challenge. The other one that I'll talk about in a few books was part of my 24 and 24 challenge. So this book it's like a Will Trent. If you don't know, he's like this detective character that she has and writes a bunch of books about. But basically in the very beginning of the book, this scientist at the CDC is kidnapped in front of her daughter. And then we flash forward and we're with Will Trent and his new girlfriend. And they're in Georgia and they hear like all these bombs go off and they go to investigate and they basically run into the people in charge of it, and the girlfriend gets kidnapped. And then it's like Will trying to find her, but then like following the girlfriend, and she like learns about like what these guys are up to. And it's very like environmental warfare, which stresses me out. I just felt like this dragged on for so long, and she did something that I really hate when you basically read the same exact chapter twice in a row because it's from different people's perspectives. But like when it works, it works. But with this, like she didn't change enough. So it was getting so repetitive and boring, and just like this didn't really work for me. 3 stars. The next book I read was All the Ways We Said Goodbye by Beatrice Williams, Lauren Willick, and Karen White. I loved this. This is only my second book from this trio. I also read their latest one, which was The Lost Summers of Newport. This is historical fiction centered around the Ritz in Paris. So for a second, I was like, I should have waited and read it in Paris, but I actually was reading this when I was like literally sitting down and planning the trip. So it worked still. So basically we have 3 timelines. The way that these books by like this author trio works, they each write a timeline. And there's a World War I timeline where the main girl there, she lives with her mom at the Ritz, but then she kind of, as the Germans like occupied some of France in World War I feel like people forget that that happened. She goes home to her family's estate and she runs into like one of the German occupiers there is a guy that like she had a thing with before the war broke out. So kind of like that like conflict and everything that goes with that. Then there's a World War II timeline where we are following a young woman whose grandmother lives at the Ritz, and her husband is a collaborator and starts becoming high up in the Nazis, and she just like cannot abide by it. So she starts sabotaging him in any way that she can. And then there is a 1960s timeline where an English woman comes to the Ritz in Paris because she is realizing that she has no idea what her now deceased husband was up to during the war, and someone reaches out to her to help solve this mystery, and she agrees to solve it with him. So all 3 timelines on their own were so good. I enjoyed every single part of this book, but when they all started rattling together and the mystery came out, like it was just so good. I loved it so much. 4 stars. Next, I read Nowhere Like Home by Sarah Shepard, which I'm like 98% sure that she wrote Pretty Little Liars. So fun fact, I never read Pretty Little Liars and I only watched like 1 season of the show, but I read The Lying Game, I think it was called. Like she had another series. This just like, it was like wild. So it's like about like a mom cult thriller. That's like really all I'm going to say. It was just so ridiculous. And like, I don't know, I just like didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Say You'll Be Mine by Naina Kumar. I gave this 2 stars. I'm sorry to report. So this is a kind of like fake dating romance, which is my favorite trope, but our main characters they're Indian and their parents are trying to arrange a marriage between them. And the girl really wants to get married, but the guy is like just agreeing to do this to get his parents off of his back. And they decide to fake date because she needs a wedding date and he wants his parents to leave him alone. And then obviously you can guess what happens. I just wasn't sold on them as a couple. So I was kind of just like, what are we doing here? Next, I read The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guzan. I also gave this 3 stars. So I picked this up at Target. I remember I saw like one TikTok about it. I don't really watch book talk videos though, so I just saw the cover and I was like, whatever. Like can barely tell you what happened in this book, but I've been told since that it is like straight up Reylo fan fiction, which like I've never seen any Star Wars, but I love the love hypothesis. This just like I don't know. It was like parts of it I really liked, and I don't want to say what parts because like spoilers, but I just wasn't so obsessed with it. I'm not going to be continuing the series. Just honestly, it wasn't for me. The next book I read was Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. I loved this. I gave this 4 stars. So if you do not know, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy was married to JFK Jr., and they both very tragically died together when the plane that he was piloting crashed into the ocean. I knew the bare bones about her. I knew that she had worked at Calvin Klein. I knew obviously she married JFK Jr. I read Carol Radswell's memoir, What Remains, which I highly recommend if you're interested in the Kennedys or just a fascinating life story. And I felt like through that, I got like an idea of who Carolyn was because they were best friends. But this really, it's so interesting. So like the author starts it off by saying that she like in the tabloids and everything and in the media at the time, Carolyn came off as like this like ice queen. She was very cold, but like the author wanted to like re-look at her through like a modern feminist lens, and that is what the book is really. So it's a biography on Carolyn. You got like her entire life story. Friends and family spoke to the author, like people that Carolyn grew up with speak to the author, so you really get to feel like you get to know her. And it made me just think so much about tabloid culture and the media, but even just the way that we look back on these women now. So a few different layers to that. Like, she actually in the end really reminded me of Princess Diana because she was so hunted by the paparazzi. And it's really like, I think that besides for her death, like the greatest tragedy is that like her husband just didn't understand the way that the media was affecting her and like fully made her depressed. And there's like been a bit of like a renaissance about her sense of style right now and her fashion. And I see these TikToks every day of like how to dress like Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, but actually she was dressing that simple because she wanted to make herself look as boring as possible for the photographers. And in the book, a friend said like she would laugh to be called a style icon today. And it really made me feel like icky about using her style as like references or inspiration because she was just trying to minimize herself so the paparazzi would leave her alone. And I feel like that's just so tragic and just speaks into this greater thing of like, and then even that became and still is like this lasting legacy. And I don't know, I just felt like I came away from this really knowing her, and she seems like she was so warm and caring and so cool. And she also, like, I feel like people forgot, like, she was so young. They were young when they got married, and then they were young when they died, and like he was gearing up towards a political career, and she was like criticized a lot for not working, but like a lot of what she was doing was behind the scenes helping him with his career. And I just like, when I finished the JFK Jr. book last month, I was like, oh, like the tragedy here is the loss of what could have been. And that's the same way I felt in this. So if you're interested in the Kennedys, if you've been looking at her outfits as style references or inspiration, I highly, highly recommend this. I did physically read it, but I feel like it would have been good on audio too. Next, I read False Witness by Karen Slaughter. So this was the other one that I mentioned before. I also gave this one 3 stars, but I did like it more than the other one. So our main girl in this is a lawyer, and we learn like right in the beginning of the book, we're like in a flashback of her life in the 80s where this insane event happens, and you are like minute by minute in it in the prologue. And then years later, actually it's like in 2020, like this is a COVID novel, which like also really like kind of lost me. But she is like, this high profile case is brought to her, and it is the son of the man that the crazy event happened with in her past. And she realizes that he knows more about the event and basically like starts taunting her and threatening her with it. And like, I really can't say because I don't want to spoil anything, but like her, that part of it was like so good, so interesting. It's just like, I feel like the author just like threw these like unnecessary things in that kind of made it like it dragged on for too long, I think is the point I'm trying to make. But she also deals with like, there's a heavy addiction theme, which was like really powerful. And like, I think if this was like like maybe 75 pages shorter, it would have been a 4-star read for me. It was like, the premise was so good, the execution of that one specific storyline was so good, it just kind of like lost me. Like, things got a little too like dragged out. Yeah. The next book that I read was The Book Lover's Library by Madeline Martin. I gave this 4 stars. I loved this. I love this author. She really writes books about the power of books. So in this, our main girl is a single mom as World War II is starting. And at the time in England, but I'm sure it happened over here too, married women and widows could not be hired. So she's a widow and like she needs to provide for her daughter, but no one will hire her. And she basically ends up like scheming the system a little bit, and she becomes there's a specific word for it, but basically she's a bookseller at the Boots Lending Library. And Boots, I've been to Boots every time I've gone to London. It's like a pharmacy. It's like a CVS. But back in the day, they had a lending library because the actual libraries didn't really hold like reading books, like novels. So you would like get a subscription and become a member, and you would go in, and like there are different levels, and you would get like basically they were librarians within Boots. So it's like a really cute concept, and it is real. That actually happened. So she becomes a bookseller there, and we follow her kind of like on this career path, really rediscovering her love of books because like something happened in her past. We follow her journey as a single mother, but at the same time, like World War II is happening, and she doesn't live in London, but like the city where she lives is also being heavily bombed, like Blitz vibes. So she deals with having to send her daughter away, and just like so much happened. I just really love this. It's about books, but it's also about strength and women's strength, and it was just so good. I really, really enjoyed it. The next book I read was The Night We Lost Him by Laura Dave. I loved this. I gave this 4 stars. So her last book, I thought it was her debut, but it turns out she has like a bunch of other books, just not thrillers, that she wrote. That one is called The Last Thing He Told Me. Actually, fun fact, like the last time I saw my grandma before she died, she borrowed that book from me and read it in a night. So you can see where I got it from. This one is less thriller and it's more family trauma. So our main girl is grieving the loss of her father, and we find out that he was like super rich, kind of like this hotel magnate, and her estranged brother comes to her and he was like, I don't think dad killed himself, I think he was murdered. And they go on this trek together and basically start realizing that like they knew nothing about their dad's life, and they start unraveling it. Then there's a second timeline that starts from the dad is young, that leads up to his death, and they're like it's a murder mystery because you're like, what happened to the dad? But as they unravel his life and his business and everything, it was so interesting. I didn't watch Succession. I did the first episode and it wasn't for me, but it kind of gave me that vibe a bit, the way that they were like family drama and like corporate business drama. Just so good. I started at like 10 p.m. and I was like, oh, I'll read 50 pages. And then I read 200. Like I just could not stop reading it. The next book I read was Rise and Divine by Lana Harper. I gave this 3 books. This is the 5th and final book in the Witches of Thistle Grove series, which is the Payback's a Witch series. I like love Payback's a Witch and then didn't really love the rest, but I like made myself keep reading them. And I didn't realize until I was done that this was the last one. And I'm like kind of glad it was the last one. It's just one of those like every October I'm like, oh, I should keep reading them. It's basically like a witchy romance series, just like not my favorite one though, but if you're looking for that, like it might work better for you. And since it's the 5th and final, like I can't really say much. The next book I read was Jackie by Dawn Tripp. I gave this 5 stars. I actually have put it on my favorite shelf behind me. So this is a biographical fiction about Jackie Kennedy, starting from when she first meets JFK all the way through to her death. It is so beautifully written. Jackie's never been my favorite first lady. I posted that she's always been number 3 on my list, and everyone was like, who are number 1 and 2? And so many people knew that Eleanor Roosevelt was my favorite first lady, which I kind of love that. But it's Eleanor, and then Hillary, and then Jackie. And through no other, like, I feel like people assume that Jackie would be my favorite, but like, she just wasn't. And she was only in there for like 2 years, so she didn't have an opportunity to like do so much. But anyway, this made me really respect her White House years in a way that I hadn't before. I feel like most portrayals of Jackie, she kind of like this book really hit on how smart she was and how she used what she was good at for the betterment. So if you don't know, like when like the White House used to be like a shit show. Like I've been in the White House, I've toured it, and it is so beautiful. It's like actually way smaller though than you think it would be in your head, but those rooms in there are gorgeous, and like as they should be. Like it is the highest house in the, in America. Like it should be beautiful, but by the time the Kennedys got in there, like it was just like a mess. And so she undertook this project where she went through the White House archives, and like she wanted it to be like a living museum of the country, and she would go to antique shows and like search, because they would just like sell shit off. So she would like look for all old historic furniture to like bring it back into the White House where I think it belongs. And she really made it what it is today and like put an emphasis on that. And like I knew that about her, but reading it in this book made me realize how important that was and how it was such a huge undertaking. And like, just like this book just made me really love her in a way that I never had before. And I found her so much more interesting than I ever did, and clever. And yeah, it is this one author's take, but I think that it's because this author got it right. And every other portrayal of Jackie I have read didn't. And this just like, it really made me love her. It is so beautifully written. I started it the night before I went on my road trip to West Virginia. And then any chance I got in like the hotel when we had downtime, and then even in the car ride home, I was reading this. I couldn't stop. Like, it's a big book. And I was just like, I wanted to just like I wanted to crawl in the pages and be in the story. I thought it was so, so good. So well written, so well researched, just like my absolute until now favorite portrayal of Jackie, and all the more because it made me really admire and respect her even more. So 5 stars. The next book I read was Realmbreaker, which was our September book club pick. So I'm not going to talk about it because there's a full episode about that. But if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I did something different this month, and I recorded voice notes on my phone as I was reading it instead of taking notes. It was way more fun for me, and I'm hoping it's more fun for you guys to listen to, because you're kind of like, it's as if I'm sending you unhinged voice notes as like via text as I'm reading a book, which is something that I do sometimes to friends. So go check that out if you haven't. And then the final book is Masters of the Air by Donald Miller. I gave this 4 stars. This was my September audiobook. So you may remember I was fucking obsessed with the Apple TV show Masters of the Air. This is the book that the show is based on. Really like super rich historical context. It's a giant World War II history. The first time I've ever done a World War II history. I really enjoyed it. I loved seeing, like, you would hear familiar names and stories from the show, but it got a lot more into like strategy and really like the actual history of what was going on. But I still found it wasn't like a man shouting information at you, which is why I think I've never picked up a World War II history before. It was really well done and entertaining and interesting. I don't know if I would have loved it as much if I was like physically reading it. I think something like a subject matter like this, I just need to be doing it on audio, but I liked it. Maybe I'll do more World War II history on audio. That is our September wrap up. Thank you so much for listening. Our October book club pick is Fang Fiction by Kate-Stayman London. That episode will be out on October 28th, and I actually already recorded it, and I was joined by the author, so it is a very fun episode you will not want to miss. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at KaraWhat. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Leave a rating and review, and I will see you next week.